Hello, and welcome back as we continue with Phantom. For the first few weeks, I confined him to the mason's yard, permitting him to work only in the absence of my other workmen and under my exclusive supervision. He still showed no inclination to remove the mask, and I knew this grim eccentricity would inevitably bring him trouble on a building site. He would not survive long there without some basic knowledge of the craft beneath his belt. Very soon he was dressing stone as though he had been born with a mason axe in his hand. Each batch of mortar that he made for me was of exact uniform consistently, and I would dearly like to have known how he managed to do that every time, without fail. One measure of fine ground Italian Palooza, 2 of clear river sand, 1 of fresh burnt lime. The formula was simple enough. Yet most apprentices make an utter botch of their first attempts to make decent mortar. God knows I received enough angry cuffs from my own master in the early days before successfully mastering the process. Perhaps I should have resented the ease which he absorbed my skills, but I could only wonder at his startling capacity to learn. He seemed to be the one with the stone, instinctively sensing its strengths and weaknesses, handling it with reverent respect, as though it were a living entity. He refused to wear the mason's gloves that would have protected him from the painful shards and splinters. He always liked to feel the stones beneath his bare hands, and often pointed out a fault in the grain that might have escaped many and a more experienced eye. The day came far sooner than I had hoped, when I knew there was nothing more he could learn in the stone-walled nursery. So I took him down to one of my sites and placed him in the charge of a layer I trusted. There were several young laborers working there, and I noted the nudges and meaningful glances they were exchanged between the lads with great misgiving. When I turned to the side at noon, the men were resting from the unreasonable heat, and I was immediately aware, from the ominously swift manner in which Gillo Calandrino approached me, that there had already been trouble made. "The new boy is a menace," the man said grimly as he wiped his dusty hands upon his apron. I frowned. "You don't find him willing to learn? Attentive, respectful?" The man gave a grunt that might have been a stifled sort of laughter. "I've no quarrel with his willingness to learn. I've had my brain picked clean by his questions all morning. He's sucked me as dry as a sponge." "Well, then what is it?" I demanded with rising irritation. "Begging your pardon, sir, but I'd say he's not quite right in the head. He's damn near killed 2 of our lads a half-hour back. I'd had sent Paolo home to get his arm dressed, and it was a nasty night wound. I doubt if able to work for the rest of the week." "I assumed the boy was provoked," I said coldly. "I wouldn't know anything about that, sir," said Calandrino, and suddenly evasive and unable to meet my eyes any longer. "But I do know he behaved like a mad savage. When I went to break it up, I thought he was going for me too, and I don't mind telling you, sir, I thought twice about tackling him with a knife in the hand. He knows how to use it, there's no mistaking that." "But he didn't harm you?" "Well, no," the layer admitted reluctantly. He seemed to have come to his senses after a moment and back off. "But you can't blame the lads. It was only a bit of fun. Stands to reason they wanted to get a look underneath the mask. I mean, any normal boy would." "I thought you said you didn't know what happened." The man went very red beneath his suntan and gave me a little shrug. "Boys will be boys, sir, but if you want my opinion, that one should be locked up. There's 1 or 2 slates loose there, if I'm not very much mistaken." "I'm not interested in your opinion," I said with measured fury. "I look to keep better control on the site during my absence. If you can't do that, maybe it's time you found yourself another position. As for the laborers, you better tell them that I don't employ them and indulge their curiosity on my time. Any more trouble and I'll send them all turned off. Do I make myself plain?" "Yes, sir." The man looked dumbstruck at my tone. "Well, what are you waiting for? Get everyone back to work." With a resentful glance, Calandrino made to turn away. "Wait," I said abruptly. "Where's the boy now?" The man jerked his thumb toward the top of the scaffolding, where, by my shielding eyes, I could just make out the distant figure hunched perilously against the fierce sun. You let an untrained lad up there? He didn't stop to ask my permission, sir, said the layer with a cool sarcasm that this time I chose to overlook. Just shut up like a bat out of hell before any of us could blink. The lads were taking bets that he was going to jump off. I made a gesture of dismissal, and the man strode away, muttering under his breath. Taking the scaffold in easy stages, I climbed in the dizzying height where the boy sat staring into the sun. He got his feet hastily when he heard me coming and stared at me with tense expectations. I knew he was waiting to be dismissed. Are you hurt, Erik? No, sir. He seemed amazed that I should have asked. Come down, then. I need your help this afternoon. Without waiting for him to reply, I returned to the ground, and for the rest of the day, as he followed my instructions to the letter, I was aware of his eyes constantly coming to rest on me with puzzling gratitude. A week later, I overheard the men talking as they prepared to leave the sun down. As soon as the mask is gone, we'll jump him, agreed. Get that mask off and see what's underneath. Yes, and give that clever little bugger a few tokens of our appreciation. If any of you have any sense, you'll leave him alone. Don't you know who he is yet? As Calandrino's voice cut off in silence for a moment, I listened to the taunt anticipation that suddenly settled on the group. You saying you know what he is? That was Paolo, admittedly never over quick on the off-take. Mother of God! Calandrino paused to hawk and spit. I should have thought it was obvious to anyone with half a brain by now. How long has it been since the master took an apprentice? Must be 10 years. Years at least. So no one else thinks it's just a bit odd when the old man turns up with a boy in a mask and starts behaving like a hen with one chick? You're not suggesting? Yes, I am suggesting. Christ, why not? The master was no more above a bit of skirt in his prime than anyone else, right? And when a man with a clutch of dollars gets himself a son on the wrong side of the blanket, it goes against the grain to leave him there. But he's a Freemason, isn't he? Mighty respectable, past master and all that. Can't have it all around the lodge that he's no better than the rest of us. So he thinks the mask is going to cover everything, including his past. Well, you seem to together. Think about it. It makes good sense and just goes to prove that I'm insane. For the past 6 months now, the master's been one brick short of a load ever since the old lady died and he had to send the girl away. Santa Maria! Exactly. I'm telling you, the whole pack of us could find ourselves turned off if anyone else sets out about the lad. I say we best be keeping well out of it. No one ever good comes out of meddling in a master's affairs. And the boy's no trouble if you leave him alone. Does more than his fair share without complaining to the old man that he's been put down upon. I stood there listening with a curious mixture of emotions while my men continued to drag my good name cheerfully through the mire. I wasn't sure how I felt about this. I had half a mind to stride out from behind that was concealing me and turn them all off their insolent assumptions, but I was not aware that my silence now could not be Erik's shield. Simply by saying nothing, allowing this monstrous slander to put down roots, I could protect him from any further pain at their hands. I could buy the boy a little more time to find his feet, perhaps lose the instinctive belief the whole world was his enemy. For some reason, he had the astonishing stroke of luck not to be recognized for his performance at the Trastevere Fair. Perhaps when performing, he had worn some fantastic mask in keeping with the status of a magician. Perhaps there were days when he simply chose not to appear at all. I don't know. I couldn't account for it. But I was aware that the luck didn't come his way often, and I didn't feel inclined to deprive him of its benefit now. So I chose to hold my peace. Even when it came to this decision, I saw it was no great sacrifice. Rumor had presented me with a son, and I could not quite find it in my heart to complain. I found I had not begrudged the boy the silent protection of my name. Once the men had left the site, I withdrew from the shadows, behind a half-built wall, to watch Erik gather up the tools that had been used all that day. All the trowels, squares, plumb rules, and chisels, which were my personal property and must be safely locked away in the mason's yard at night. When he had finished, he had went over to inspect the work and had been completed, studying the beds as though he wished to commit the exact position of each mortar joint in memory. The light was failing rapidly now. It was the first week of October, and there was a threat of storm still in the air. Erik! He started so violently at the sound of my voice I knew he had believed himself to be alone. Leave that now, boy. Tomorrow's another day. He stared at me in bewilderment. Right at the very end was a concept he'd never been able to understand. Rope wasn't built overnight, you know, I added, beckoning to my side. You need patience to master the trade. Come along now. It's time to go home. I waited for him to pick his way across the site with a sling of tools on his shoulder. He moved like a cat with a lithe, flowering grace that made him pleasing to watch. In spite of his height, he had none of the gawkishness normally associated with age. We fell into the step together and began to walk through the steadily darkened streets toward the mason's yard. I couldn't see his face. Of course, I couldn't swear to it. I am sure he smiled at me for the first time that night. I made no attempt to set boundaries or to limit the nature of the work I permitted him to tackle. Ignoring the time-honored traditions and increasingly resentful workmen, I simply permitted him to develop at his own staggering pace. Within 6 months, he could random chisel, fine chisel, rub, or work fair exactly to my specification. I was already allowed him to set squalor ashlar. He could keep beds and joints full and square for their whole depth and preserve the outer arises so that work, when set, was closed and solid throughout. And whether he was fixing arch springers or cutting grooves for leading flashes in a stone parapet, it was never necessary to inspect the quality of his finished work. He had only one standard. If he had felt he made a mistake, he was never too proud to ask for my correction, but he rarely made mistakes, and the few he did make were never repeated. The question of indentures never arose between us. I knew by the end of our first month that I could never hope to imprison him with the age-old fashioned chains of my craft. So I gave him his freedom, and was rewarded in turn by a single-line self-discipline of a boy who simply chose to serve me for a time upon his own unspoken terms, who, though he would not be my bondsman, never showed me anything less than absolute respect. Slowly, over the months, I became aware of the respect changing steadily into guarded affection. As the winter drew, I found a series of minor tasks that would keep him at my side for another hour or so in the evening. I needed a fire built, the figures in the ledger kept up to date, estimates drafted, but in time I was able to dispense with these transparent ploys as he found the confidence to linger at the hearth of his own accord. At the end of February, when the mild weather suddenly turned against us and put a stop to his outside work, I watched him grow restless and wondered uneasily if he had intended to leave me. He asked if I might go and draw in Florence for a few weeks, and I agreed without a murmur of protest, for I had always known it would not be possible to hold him against his will. As I watched him ride off into the snow, I did not expect him to return. He already told me that it was his intention one day to study the architecture of the whole world, and I felt that Rome must inevitably lead to Naples and Pompeii, Apulia to Bari, Athens to Egypt. The raging appetite for knowledge must not be contained beneath my roof, and I fear the wandering wanderlust that would inexplorably put him even farther from my restraining hand. But in the last week of March he was back, pausing in the courtyard to unpack the dozens of sketches he had completed as proof of his industry. As I lay once more in the early hours in the morning, listening to the distant notes of his violin. I realized how deeply I had missed his elusive presence in the house, the odd, haunting pleasure of his shy companionship. One day he would leave and not return. I knew that was inevitable, but I found I could not bear to think ahead to a time when he would be gone from my life for good. The year turned on its unfailing cycle, and the approach of summer brought a series of humid, airless days that would make me pressingly aware of my years and my failing health. In the first week of June, Rome began to swelter with a merciless heat that swamped my strength, and then sent me staggering out in the country yard one evening, coughing like a compulsive in a sanatorium, and desperately seeking air. The lantern suspended from the outer wall showed me the ominous flecks of blood upon my handkerchief. In the brief pause between the spasms, I stared at them with grim resignation. Suddenly, without a sound, Erik was beside me, and I saw that he too was staring at the bloody linen with pained understanding. "You are very ill, sir," he said with quiet concern. I made a breathless, philosophical gesture and stuffed the handkerchief into my pocket, because I saw the sight of it distracted him. "All Masons come to this fate in time, Erik. There's no cure been found for a lung full of grit and dust. But I reckon I've been a good year or two in me left. There's no cause to look so alarmed, boy." He hesitated for a moment, and then produced a small vial which had evidently been concealed behind his back. "If you care to try this," he began diffidently, "I think you'll find it gives you some ease." I took the vial from him and unstopped it, releasing a pungent yet not unpleasing aroma of herbs. Where did you come by this?" I inquired with puzzled interest. "I made it," he confessed awkwardly. "I was taught by the gypsies to understand herbal properties." I took an experimental sip and pulled a face. "Kill or cure, is it, lad?" He laughed at that. More and more now he was beginning to accept my gentle teasing, learning to laugh at his own seriousness, even at his occasional mistakes. You should try the cure for gout," he volunteered unexpectedly. "That really is cause for taste. It tastes like skunk's urine and keeps a man on the privy for a week. It doesn't work either," he added, as a wry afterthought. I finished the potion and returned the empty vial to him with a smile. "Perhaps you could give me a hand by those stairs now," I said. "Oh, yes," he sounded utterly startled by the suggestion. "Of course." He came forward to offer me his arm with a sort of downstruck wonder, and I put my hand on my shoulder, permitting him to take my full weight on a slim yet surprisingly strong frame. When we reached my room, he lowered me tenderly onto the bed and then knelt to remove my boots. "Good night, sir," he said gently. "I hope you can rest now." I was already pleasantly drowsy. Whatever he had given me was calming the spasm in my chest and acted like a power opiate. I saw him glance briefly around the chamber as though to make sure not anything overlooked anything that might appertain to my comfort. He went across to close the wooden shutters in the window, and when I returned to set a glass of water beside the bed, I reached up impulsively to squeeze his cold hand. "You're a good boy, Erik," I said fondly. "I'd like to think you won't let anyone ever tell you otherwise." He held onto my fingers for a moment, enclosing them between the palms, I could very well that he started to tremble. My God, the boy was crying because I spoke kindly and touched him with affection. "Erik," I whispered helplessly, "I'm sorry." He stammered, dropping his hand, and stepped back from the hastily. "I'm very sorry. Please forgive me." And before I could say a word to stop him, he fled across from the room. I lay back on my pillows, staring at the stuccoed ceiling. The turbulence of his fierce, repressed emotion made me wonder yet again how I was going to approach a situation that could not be avoided much longer. For I had not been entirely honest with him when I led him to believe I lived alone as a widower, intending surrounded only by an old woman who came to cook and clean and the occasional dutiful visit from matronly daughters, living some distance outside of Rome. 11 months had slipped away, and I still had not found an appropriate month to confess my sin of omission. It was June already, and soon, very soon, Luciana would be coming home for the summer. And that's the end of that chapter. I'll see you next time.